I wish the chairman was here, because I don't like to give other people compliments on my birthday. I try to reserve those solely for myself, but I'll be remiss if I didn't just hit on the topic of credibility. It's a currency that is dwindling in this place of Congress, unfortunately. And I really appreciated his opening statements. To be able to stand in front of a sitting committee and fully state that he wishes his party, my party, and I share the sentiment, could have done more and would have done more about spending, overall spending, mandatory direct spending or discretionary spending across the board. Wished in 2017 when we had majorities in the White House, or the White House, the House, and the Senate. Wish we would have done more. And we would have had an even stronger argument, in my opinion, of what I think is a pretty strong argument with respect to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, but I truly wish that would have been the case. And I appreciate his willingness to be, say he's somebody that has always led that way. He's inspired me. It's why I want to be close. I'm on both of the major committees that he's on, and it's a currency that we just don't have much of back here, and I've appreciated that from our chairman. And also, the minority witness, Mr. Mazur, you earlier said I would quibble or I would hesitate to just fully lay blame or cast the context that it's, laid out that it's this president did this president did this. I've heard it communicated oftentimes. Sometimes the economy is what makes the president, actually. And our economic cycles go in a certain way that sometimes you catch the tail end. I don't blame the entire 2008 financial crisis on President George Bush. No way, right? That has been policy that has gone on for years, neglect of a lot of different things with lots of players. So I appreciate that concept of credibility. And I was back in Utah with my colleague from the 3rd District, John Curtis, Representative Curtis, and he actually put it better than I've ever heard anybody say it. And I'm going to talk about calling the tax scam, calling the Tax Cut and Jobs Act the tax scam for the rich. I'm going to just emphasize the way he communicated it. He said, "Never seen it's uncanny to me that Democrats have an opportunity when they can communicate a message and stay on that point so much that ultimately the media and a large group of people will ultimately believe it. And we will stand up as Republicans and list out all this data. I'm going to do it again. List out all this data and all this good information that refutes that fact. And oftentimes my colleagues from the other side of the aisle, all they have to do sometimes is stand up and say, this is a tax cut for the rich. And literally, that's the narrative that continues on. I resent, and I would hope that we could actually agree that the child tax credit is not a tax scam. That real wage growth, because the Tax Cut and Jobs Act didn't create an enormous amount of inflation. It didn't create any. We were able to see real wage growth take place. You had a doubling of the standard deduction. Is that a direct benefit to the wealthy? In fact, I'll ask the question, Mr. Mazur, even asking the minority witness a question. Would you say that the standard deduction is a benefit to the wealthy? Would you also say that SALT, the way we address SALT, by saying what was the average across the country of state and local taxes and that deduction? Let's double it. And is that a benefit to the wealthy, what we did on SALT?
There are pros and cons to all these things, right? So if you take individual items, you can say they benefited high-income people or lower-income people. But Tax Cuts and Jobs Act had lots of moving parts.
Yeah, it's a very large piece of legislation.
And so when you talk about the SALT deduction, you also largely repealed the alternative minimum tax. And many people who feel that they lost the deduction for their state and local taxes actually lost it under prior law through the alternative minimum tax.
Right. So don't disagree with any of that. And I'm trying to make the point here that so many provisions in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act weren't just this benefit to the wealthy. And I think it's a disingenuous narrative, but this place is what it is, I get it. And I would like to just, with my remaining time that I used way too much, focus on just one last thing. We have the R&D tax credit. To Mr. McBride, the R&D tax credit. Can we look at that and say, this is something we've got to preserve and work together? Would you suggest that Congress try to work together on a bipartisan way to make this happen, so we can make sure that we can write off these expenses in that first year.
Well, you mentioned R&D credit. I think you mean R&D expensing. That's the item.
R&D
that's
expenses,
now-
yes.
Is now expired, and we're now faced with the first time ever in this tax code we've had for 100 years, where businesses are required to wait for those deductions and suddenly figure out how to amortize R&D expenses, which are primarily labor expenses, about 70%. So this is, paying scientists and stuff like this.
Sadly, the gentleman's
Thank you.
time has expired.